Hi again, Mark here from Talking Bass. Today sees the start of our new regular feature, the Talkingbass Podcast. We'll have releases every Wednesday featuring interviews with bass players from every walk of life, from rock stars to session musicians to general working pros. This week we're going to kick things off with the bass player that needs no introduction, Mr. Leland Sklar. Lee is one of the most recorded and successful bass players of the pop and rock era. He's a session musician of the highest order and has a CV that includes gigs and recordings with the likes of James Taylor, Carole King, Phil Collins, Jackson Browne, Barbra Streisand, Toto, and hundreds more. He's also played on the soundtracks to many films and TV shows over the past 50 years, so even if you aren't familiar with his name, I 100% guarantee that you've heard his playing many, many times. Lee has a new and very successful YouTube channel that he set up at the start of the COVID pandemic, and I'd highly recommend watching his daily shows in which he plays along to many of his great recordings, and he provides awesome stories and anecdotes from his gigs and sessions over the years. Unfortunately, the first few seconds of the recording were a little corrupted, so we'll begin shortly after our greetings and my opening question on how he's been coping with life and his work in the midst of the global pandemic. Enjoy!
They just reopened outdoor dining after a long time, but it's still real limited space, and there's absolutely no live music going on, and tiny bits of studio work, but they're doing that under very controlled situations. So it's difficult. It's who would have thought a year ago this would be our life? But we have to get through it. So the main thing right now is to be safe. And I'm in that older age group, so I got my first shot and of Moderna, and I go in on the 25th and get my second shot. And my life won't change much at that point. I'll feel safer, but I'll still have to wear masks, and there'll still be real limited going out, because even if you're well, you can still infect other people. It's insane. It's so difficult. But we have to persevere.
Yeah.
You know? So I've been working my ass off this year on a lot of different projects, none of which are ultimately my plan A, which is supposed to be on the road and out with our band and all that. But I've got a real strong plan B going.
You've got all your YouTube channel going, haven't you? That's been going great.
It is really unbelievable, and it started totally by accident. I really hadn't intended to start a YouTube channel. But once I did that first video, I've done at least one video every single day. I haven't missed one day yet. So there's I think there's like 420 some videos up now. And when we're finished with this, I've got one planned for today. And a really wonderful community has evolved out of this. And it's kind of like when people are dealing with isolation at this point and the lack of social situations. The YouTube channel's been a godsend on that level. I formed a clubhouse on it, and I do 2 live streams a month that go for about 2.5 hours. And the people on that, sometimes I'm not even necessary. They've become such a tight community that they all talk to each other, and they're catching up on family and things. And I just sit back and I go, this is great. This is really what was needed at this time. So it's been great, and it's allowed me to kind of go back and revisiting my career, which I never did. I've never given a thought to what I've done in the past. But all of a sudden, relearning songs that I did 50 years ago and things like that, and remembering other players that are gone and telling stories about them. So it's a long-winded answer to that question. But yeah, the YouTube thing's been an amazing thing for me to have experienced this year, and I have no intention of stopping it once the pandemic's over. I figure first off, it'll never be over. There's always going to be stuff to deal with, but I figure at that point, I'll just take it on the road. When I go out on tour, I can do, broadcasting from gigs and travel and stuff. So in a dark time, it's been a light.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Have you had to relearn most of those old tunes that you used to
yeah.
do?
And I usually give myself about 5 minutes to learn them. I mean, I kind of grab it. I'm not doing karaoke. I'm not making it exactly note for note.
Hmm.
I'm trying to catch the essence of what these songs were all about. And, I haven't dug into some really complicated stuff just because I don't have the time
Hmm.
to really sit and chart things out, because a lot of sessions were incredibly involved, and you're dealing with 8 pages of music and stuff. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I went through a lot of Phil Collins and James Taylor and Jackson Browne, and yesterday I was doing Richard Marx, and today I'm doing Katie Segal. But it's all people I'm only putting up things that I played on, and showing the bass parts. When I'm playing along, I do a little mix here where my bass, when I'm playing, is louder than the tracks so that they can hear that. And the response has been great. I'm really appreciative of it.
Yeah. I mean, I forget songs that I played a year ago. It's like
Yeah.
some of those. I'm guessing some of them probably stick in the head more than, like Susudio, for instance. You'll have played that so many times with Phil. So I'm guessing that's never going to disappear.
Yeah, but like when I did Doctor My Eyes, I had to wrap my head back around Doctor My Eyes again. And, going back and doing the Billy Cobham stuff, not that it's complicated, but it's also during a period like this, it's just trying to keep your chops up when you're not out working. So I try to play every day, but it's not as intense as when you're on the road. So it's been a challenge on a number of levels, between chops and remembering parts and remembering stories. So I figure, if nothing else, at least my brain isn't dying at this point.
yeah, because I've noticed that as well, that my hands, I just don't feel like I'm in, like you get those sort of road chops kind of things. And it's like I'm playing, and I can be playing something that might be fairly difficult or something, but it doesn't feel the same. The fingers just don't have that.
And you worry about calluses, you worry about things softening up a little bit, and so much, at least for me, so much playing is muscle memory, and when the muscles aren't being used the same way, they start to go to a different level. And so, I'm really relieved when, like, maybe some evening I'll sit here and I'll pull out the last tour we did with Phil Collins. That was how this whole thing started, and I'll just play the whole show. I'll just sit here and play the whole show. And I'm going through all these songs like Susudio and Invisible Touch, and and Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. And I'm going, okay, because I played them fine and everything. So I'm relieved, rather than sitting there going, oh, Jesus, I suck. What happened to me? I'm going.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've that has definitely, one thing that I've noticed a lot from watching, because I'm addicted to your channel. I love it. I just watch it, everything that you put out. And the one thing out of it all that I notice with you is, well, it's two things, is your tone and time, mainly your time. Like, obviously you've got great time, but it's very noticeable. Like you can watch anybody on YouTube, playing, and, especially if they're playing away from, a band or something like that.
Yeah.
And I've noticed when I'm watching you that you're very kind of, metronomically precise is the wrong word, but that pocket is there, and even away from everything else. And so that was one thing I was going to ask you, like, especially, I know that they're both not the same thing, tone and time, but they are related, I guess, in some ways. Is that those two things, are they something that you've ever consciously worked on, or is it just something that's just come from working and just gigging?
I think it's just what I do. I've never really thought about it, and I listened back to, like, I did a little thing about this band Wolfgang that I was in the late '60s, and my bass tone really hasn't changed from that, because in that band I was playing a '62 jazz bass, and when I'm playing my Frankenstein bass, it's kind of the very similar tone. When I play my Dingwall, it's a very similar tone. So I have a sonic that I really find appealing, that seems to fit in to almost every genre. if I'm doing country, I mean, I might tweak something a bit more if I'm asked to, because sometimes I get called to do like hip hop, where they've programmed the bass, but they want to add something to it to make it a little more organic.
Yeah.
And I might tweak around that a little bit because the bass is already pretty well covered by the synth that they've programmed. But in terms of pocket, I mean, I've talked about this before. I'm not, and it's hard to explain because to me, I understand it fully in my mind, but I'm not an intellectual player. There's a lot of guys in LA that when they're playing, there's a precision and an absolute correctness in what they do, and it's very, you graphed out. And it may not be the way they think about it, but that's how I hear them. When I'm playing, my kind of conscious level shuts off the minute the red light comes on or the gig starts. And I go into a space where I'll never play anything the same way twice. I go into some kind of an inner zone, and it's not a spiritual thing or anything like that, but I don't really think about it. I'm just responding moment by moment to what I'm hearing. And the interesting part of my gig, to me, is always where one day I could be, playing with Levon, back in the day, like I could be playing with Levon Helm one day and Dave Weckl the next.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm constantly adjusting between, Russ Kunkel and Vinnie Colaiuta and John Robinson and Jim Keltner, and all these different drummers come from such profoundly different directions in terms of where they lay their, where their foot lays, where their snare lays, and all that. And so I'm very malleable in terms of pocket. I find it real comfortable to settle in with whoever I'm playing with, and sometimes we have to make adjustments to each other. But after this many years with so many of these guys, we kind of know what we're doing when we get together. But it's great. I mean, to me, that's absolutely one of my favorite parts of my entire career, has been able to play with, Phil Collins as a drummer, and Peter Erskine and all of these guys. I sit and I just kind of sit like fanboy every time I walk into a date with these guys, because I don't take anything for granted. And so every day's an adventure. But tonally and pocket-wise, I think I'm really consistent in my inconsistency, because I'm adjusting every time. And again, everything to me is predicated on individual songs. It's not a genre. It's not because even within, like if I was doing a Reba McEntire record, country record like that, and we might have one track that's nothing but really half notes, whole notes, and just big broad support. And then we might do something like the Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia or something like that, which is much more fun. I might make a little adjustment for that, but
yeah, that is funny that you say that about the drummers, because it was exactly what I was just about to ask you, actually. That I always find that going from band to band, or drummer to drummer, well, especially drummer to drummer, even though they might both be brilliant drummers, the difference in feel, it's like they'll play fills at different times, the pocket will be different. And I always find, for me, there's this buffer period of maybe, it might even just be a couple of songs before getting used to that new feel.
Yeah.
But do you find, I mean, you pretty much answered it before, but it's like, do you find that you ever have those little buffer periods when you're playing with a new drummer?
If it's a new drummer, certainly. I mean, if it's a drummer who I've have history with, even though we've played different genres maybe together. If it's a brand new drummer, there's always going to be that maybe it could even be 12 bars before you're suddenly just feeling where that person's feeling it. And you make your adjustments, and hopefully they're making their adjustments too, because they're under the same circumstances. And may have been working with a bass player for the past month or year or something like that has a slightly different feel, and so they're adjusting too, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, but usually that stuff goes down pretty quick. The only time for me that it's ever been kind of a drag is there are certain drummers who I just don't feel connected with for some as much as if I walk in the studio and I see a road case with their name on it, my heart kind of sinks a little bit. I mean, I know we'll make good music, but I know it's going to be an effort as compared to other people where it just goes, just man locks in and we're off and running.
Do you find
those are very few and far between.
How's Phil Collins when in that, you know, when you're playing with him?
Phil, feel wise, is probably one of the best pocket drummers I've ever played with. And the thing I always found fascinating with Phil is if you were walking down the street and met Phil and you had no clue who he was, you know, it was just a casual conversation. And you said to him, "So what do you do?" He would say, "Oh, I'm a drummer."
Yeah.
So not a singer, not a songwriter, not a front man. I mean, he does all of it great. But in his heart, like when you listen to, like, especially some of the stuff where he's scatting with the horn section, I mean, he sings like a drummer. He's so rhythmic in his singing. I always used to joke with him, and I'd say, "God, I hate this gig." And he'd go, what's the problem? And I go, "I'm standing 10 feet from one of the best drummers I've ever played with, and he's not playing drums." You know, and the difference, I mean, it's really incredible when you listen to like the same song with him playing it, with Chester Thompson playing it, or now with Phil's son Nick playing it.
Yeah.
They're all playing the same part pretty much, but the feel is 3 different feels on these things. And I for a lot of it, I was used to Phil because Phil was the original recording, and that's what I played to, where they're all great, you know, and they all have their own thing. So yeah, Phil's wonderful. You know, and it breaks my heart that he can't play anymore, because I know in his heart of hearts, that's he misses the most, is being able to sit behind the kit and just play.
Yeah, it's sad. It's funny you mention you mentioned it earlier about your like one of the first bands that you mentioned. It was what they called in the 60s, Wolfgang. That was with Ricky Lancelotti, wasn't it?
Yeah,
the singer. Yeah, because I'm a massive Frank Zappa freak. I am like the biggest Frank Zappa fan in the world. I wrote a book on him and everything.
Oh, great.
And and as soon as I saw that, I saw it mentioned somewhere that you played with him, and I was like, hold on. That's the dude that was on Overnight Sensation, that was on 50/50 Zombie Wolf and all that stuff. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. How was he?
Rick was insane. Rick was totally insane. I mean, he was a piece of work. He was probably one of the better singers I've ever worked with in this business. I mean, he was amazing, but he was a handful. Just one of the true characters. And I think eventually that's what cost him his life. But yeah, I was a Zappa freak too. On my old Peace Love bass, my original 62 jazz bass, I had a picture of Frank decoupaged on the back of the bass. And I used to go to all the Mothers concerts. I'd see Vito and his dancers and the Guambos and all these weird, crazy things. And I remember driving down Sunset Boulevard one day, and I see this guy hitchhiking, and I picked him up, and it was Ray Collins from the original band. And Billy Mundy and Roy Estrada were one of my favorite rhythm sections. So Rick was amazing. But man, it was like when he walked up to that mic, it took your breath away. He was so good. And it was interesting. Wolfgang had only rehearsed. I mean, it was still one of the best bands I've ever been in. And we had only rehearsed. We'd never been on a stage before. And the very first gig we got was opening for Led Zeppelin at Winterland. And we walked out there and had the house. I mean, we walked off of there and people were going, "You guys are unbelievable." We're looking at each other going, "At least now we know we can play live."
Yeah. That's amazing.
But, Rick was a trip. He was a piece of work. And but it was, man, to be able to walk out on stage with a guy like that and have him open his mouth, it'd be like being with Jack Bruce or one of those guys that they open their mouth and it's a voice on another level.
Yeah, he had a really distinctive sound. It was very different.
Very distinctive. Very like he almost sounded, there was an element of like if you rolled Sam and Dave up into one guy, and then added like some Pavarotti to it. It was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, because
he
he had a
was,
massive range as well, didn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he did
I've
the
still got
banana
some. I
splits.
might put up a few more Wolfgang songs on the
Yeah.
because the demos never got finished or anything. We did them with David Rubinson up in San Francisco, and I think we cut about 9 songs, and nothing ever happened with any of it. It was really hard. And the reason we were called Wolfgang was because Bill Graham was our manager, and Bill Graham's real name was Wolfgang.
Right.
So we named the band after him just as a big suck up.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I'd love to hear that. That would be fantastic.
yeah, it's really good stuff. Jesus, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I was yeah, one of the other things I was gonna say is like you as a player are you're kind of like along the Pino Palladino, Abraham Laboriel, that kind of way, that you wear a lot of different hats in terms of different styles that you've played in a lot of different sort of genres, because you've done TV music, film music, but country, pop, rock, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And do you feel like when you're playing in all of those different styles, let's say,
Yeah.
do you feel like you have to adapt your playing to those styles, or is it more that you just do your thing and it kind of just, you just kind of do what you do?
I would think that I probably have about 20% adaptation to that style, and then about 80% of me bringing what I do to that style. Because generally, on a lot of things, you get hired, like Pino would get hired, for these things. They just go, I want that Pino thing. So I end up, like people will say, look, even if there's a chart, they'll say, okay, the chart's a guide, now bring you to it, kind of thing, where they want like some glisses and nuances and little things where the chart's, more analytical. But I would say, for the most part, they really want you to do what you do. And there's times where I've gone in, like one of the things that maybe has made things a little more difficult over the years is on early projects like the James Taylors and Jackson Brownes and all these different artists like that. They would come in and either sit at a piano or a guitar and play you the tune, and then you would create your parts. Where nowadays, so many people have home setups that they'll spend 6 months working on their demo.
Yeah.
And it's like a finished project, and then they come in and you've got, they've spent 6 months and then you've got a couple hours to make it better. And you're going, what else do you need? You've done everything you want on this thing. You even, like maybe in some library there was my sound somebody copped, and you're already using my sound on it.
Yeah.
So what the hell do you need me for? So that's made some of the work in this day and age a little more difficult, as people get what the players all call demoitis. People are just so sold. It's like, do what you do, and then you start to do it, and they go, yeah, I kind of like what I did in that bar there. Could you, so suddenly you've got restraints on you like that. And some of them are great. Some of these people have come up with great ideas, and I kind of go, that's a nice one to tuck away in my kind of mental Rolodex for later on. I might be able to use that on something else too, because there's a finite amount of parts, that you can. I was just sitting this morning listening, because I was looking on Facebook. There was another one of those lists of, if you could hire, this guy for the bass player, who would you? And then there's this list of all the McCartney and Geddy Lee and Pino and all these. And I was sitting there watching a video of Tom Kennedy, and I was just going, why in the hell is he never on any of the lists of like the great players? Because when I've seen him live, it's so breathtaking watching him play. He's so good. And there was a bass player named Bobby Leidig who played on all the early Seals and Croft records. Passed away many years ago, but just the most beautifully crafted, creative parts and stuff. So I always look at those lists and I just think it's such bullshit, It's like,
you've got your own list of like.
Yeah, there's so many great players out there, but there's when I look at those lists, there's a lot of great players that could not do what I do or Abe does or Pino does, because they're very specific to what they do, and to be put in other genres, they would be fine maybe within their genre. Say they're a metal bass player, and they get hired to do a bunch of different bands that are more metal or punk. They might be perfect for that, but then getting called to do like a Bernadette Peters record or Barbra Streisand would not be their thing.
You're a lot more
we all
pliable.
have our niche.
Yeah.
In this.
Yeah, because you can move from one thing to another. Plus, I mean, that was what else I was going to ask you as well about reading, because it's one of those things that, I talk about a lot on the channel and, reading courses and all that stuff. And because you started on piano and then moved to double bass, and I'm guessing your background in that gave you a really good foundation for reading charts for a start. But when you moved into a lot more of the studio work, how much of that actually was reading stuff? I'm guessing you still have to read a ton of parts, but
tiny bit. Most of my reading was involved in movies and television. Not that many album projects had chart, or they had them, but they were once again they would always say the chart's a guide. Now do your thing, kind of a mentality on it. But I felt very fortunate that I had this background in classical piano, so that when the opportunity came to do studio work, because my career went from, it was kind of like driving a top fuel dragster. You were going from 0 to 100 miles an hour in 1 second. Where we had no experience in the studio whatsoever, except for me, that one demo session I did with Wolfgang. And the next thing I knew, I was like one of the first call players in town when we started with James Taylor. So I was like, my learning curve was more of a trajectory, really having to get it together. I know guys that because of the success they were having at that time got called to do some of those dates. And they walked in and they opened up that chart, and and their blood ran from their head, and it was difficult. It got awkward for them. And the fortunate thing of piano for me too was the fact that I was fine with treble clef. So if a copy is screwed up and I suddenly open up my bass book and it's written in treble clef by mistake, I could still read it. I'd have to wrap my head around it for a second. But for the most part, doing what I've done, you really find yourself in all kinds of situations where when I'd go to Nashville, I had to wrap my head around the Nashville number system rather than traditional charts, which absolutely makes the most sense of all especially for that kind of music. Because for so many of the projects, we were like working on tunes, but we still didn't have a key for it. And then the artist would show up and then. So when you've got something that's 1, 4, 5, and blah, if you're running the song down in A and they say we want to do it in C, well, 1 just becomes C rather than, so you're not transposing all the time in your head, which made a lot of that stuff. And sometimes you would sketch a little thing in, because when it would do modulations, somebody would write in, well, 1 is the 4 from the last key kind of thing. But you find yourself in every kind of situation possible, from absolutely nothing in front of you to very comprehensive charts, and it's all skills, and none of those skills are really beyond anybody. It's just whether or not you want to devote the time. There's guys who have had incredibly successful careers in music. I mean, when I read interviews and Pino says he can't read music, I say, well, your natural gift is so profound, but it's just, to me, it's like, you can't read music. I mean, you're so good. And imagine what this might open up. It's not like he's going to get more gigs from that, because he already works his ass off. But it depends what your desires are in the music business. You can go through this business your whole life and never read a note of music if the music you're doing is like your band and you're learning it all. But to work in the studio as a studio musician, you have to have as many skills as possible, because you never know what's going to be demanded of you when you walk in the door. Rarely, and I mean rarely, do you ever have advance notice of what you're coming into, even artistically or genre-wise or anything. So you kind of have to be prepared for whatever's going to happen.
Yeah, I always say that about reading, that if you can read, you probably won't be out of work. I mean, most of the gigs that I've had over the last 15 years of a lot of them have been reading gigs, because you can take theatre work, you can take resident bands in places, cruise work, all of that stuff, and often, most of the time, it's like reading stuff on the fly. And if you don't have those skills, like you said, it's not something that's particularly difficult to actually. People always think it's really difficult to learn to read, but it's no different from learning to read a book. It's like learning language. And without those, there's a lot of people that would be great bass players, but they just don't have access to those gigs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and one of the funny things too is, like, I've done gigs where, there's a book of songs for the gig, and playing the songs is easy. The hardest part sometimes is finding the song in the book.
Yeah, that's skill in itself.
They're wanting to count it off, and you're still scrambling through it because they didn't put it in order, and you're looking for this goddamn chart that's in there somewhere. Reading the chart is easy. I did a gig a couple of years ago, and it was really great because they did it all with iPads, and the guy who was the MD on the gig controlled all the iPads. So when whatever the next song would be, is he would hit it and it would come up immediately on your iPad. Yeah. So that made it easy. But most of that stuff, even if I don't know the song, once you're a couple of bars into it, you find a way. The audience, they're not scrutinizing it. They're there to have a good time. So don't get all paranoid and freaked out that, oh God, what am I going to do on this one? Just play it and look like you know what you're doing, and the audience will go with you. Somebody in the band might give you a weird look, but I think
that's half of it, is having the conviction and the confidence. Because if you've got a little bit of, if your reading's okay, you can have good reading, but if you go to pieces on the stand with the music, it can all fall apart. But as long as you've got some, and if you've got a good ear as well, I think that can help, because then if you get lost, you're fine. And also, I think if it's a song that you've played before that or even if you've just heard it before and you're reading it, you can it's kind of like a halfway house between reading it and knowing it by ear sometimes.
Yeah. The worst thing would be is a song that you know very well, and suddenly you get called to do a gig and they've got it in a different key.
Yeah. Or they've written it wrong.
Yeah. And your muscle memory is saying, this isn't right because I'm not where I'm supposed to be. You can psych yourself out pretty quickly on that. As you do these gigs for years and years, like with Phil Collins, eventually they're going to start to lower keys. And suddenly, wrapping your head around something you've played for 20 years in one key, playing it a half step lower, it can be weird. I mean, you do it, but it takes a while to really get used to, because so much of it is, you might even be used to, there's a part where you might just glance down at the neck.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you got to remember that that's where you're looking right now is not where you are now. You've got to, slip down.
Or if you're using open strings. If you're using open strings,
then you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
Well, that's really why I have used 5-string on the road. In the studio, I can play around with things like that. But on tour, I generally only bring 2 basses on tour with me, and they're my 2 Dingwalls, and they're redundant. So, and one is only there in case there's an accident with one, break a string or it falls over and something happens to it. But it's because some of these songs where I had an open E, suddenly I've got an E flat on them. We've dropped them, and rather than changing instruments, I would rather give the front of house person the most consistent sound he can work with, so that he can build around that. And so I always, as much as I'm in my heart, I'm still a 4-string player. For touring, I end up pretty much using a 5, just for that reason of songs have been dropped.
Yeah. Do you still use your Franken bass?
Sitting right next to me here.
Yeah.
It's really still my go-to instrument. I love Dingwall. It took me years to find a 5-string that I loved, because so many of the 5-strings, especially years ago, that B string just didn't sound like the rest of the bass. It was just moving air. Yeah. And when I met Sheldon at a NAMM show and he showed me his bass, I was sold on it, and that's what I've used ever since. And then I got involved with Warwick, but the only bass I ever played from Warwick was a Star bass. They're semi-acoustic, and those three basses pretty much cover everything that I would ever want to do. I have a Hofner, and occasionally I'll use that for some if it feels like the right bass for it. But for the most part, and even those three basses really sonically sound very similar. I can tweak them to be different sounding instruments, but my go-to sound is pretty consistent between the three.
How do you like the fan frets on the Dingwall?
I felt great with them the minute I played it. It's weird. People are different. I adjusted to it in a matter of minutes. The wonderful bass player Hutch Hutchinson came over to the house one day, and he tried out the bass, and he's going, God, this thing sounds so good. But he hadn't really looked at it yet. And as soon as he looked at the frets, he suddenly was uncomfortable playing it. It kind of freaked out. The only place where it even gets remotely weird is if you're really up at the top of the neck, because of the fan fretting, you've got a backslash to the frets. So if you're actually looking down and you see that dot on the side of the neck, well, the actual fret is ending up about a quarter of an inch, farther away. But I also feel that if you're spending a lot of time up there, you need a bass player.
Yeah.
So, but I love it. Sonically, every time I've ever used it on a, engineers will say, what kind of bass is that? Sounds unbelievable. And and I know there's a lot of good basses, but I'm not a gearhead. So, I would walk through the NAMM show, and I know there's a ton of instruments that probably sound fantastic, and people are saying, oh, you got to check my bass out. And I kind of go, nah, I wish you all the luck in the world, but I don't need it, and everything, as soon as you touch anything, it becomes a commitment in people's minds. So I'm very leery of that. They go, oh, can I get a picture with you with my bass? Yeah. And next thing you know, they've put out like a little blurb saying, oh, Lee Sklar's using one of our basses, kind of thing.
But I found it quite odd not odd, but when I saw that you were using Dingwalls, because I knew about the Frankenstein bass, which I knew was very traditional in it, and built for purpose,
Yeah.
And then when I saw the Dingwalls, I'm like, man, that's like, because it looks like a Lamborghini, it's like this crazy modern kind of thing. And I was like, wow. But so I was always thinking, I wonder how he managed to, I wonder why he went for the Dingwall. But that said, obviously the B string on those is so good with the fan fret, with that extra long scale. It's just,
I've even got a hip shot detuner on my B string.
Yeah. I bet it's still fairly tight, isn't it?
It is. It's tight, and it reads sonically as a note. It's not just some air moving. I'm not like, there are certain guys, like I was really lucky back in the early days. I got an alembic bass, and some people swear by them. I just hated it. And I was really lucky that John Entwistle was looking for an alembic bass only to hang on a wall, because he apparently had hundreds of basses and he displayed them all. And he ended up buying it from me because it was gorgeous. It was a piece of furniture, zebra and Coca-Cola and all these fantastic woods. It just didn't play that well for me, for my taste, where I look at Jimmy Johnson, lives with alembic. And so each guy has his own taste. But I've had a couple of basses that I picked up at flea markets for like $75 that were great.
Yeah.
So I don't look at, like the cost of a bass necessarily making it a decent instrument. But when I hooked up with Warwick, there was I was at Bass Player Live in Los Angeles a number of years ago, and Warwick, like I used to go out to Germany to the Music Messe with them, and they always had a pretty big footprint at any one of those trade shows. And so I went early to Hollywood to the Bass Player Live, and I went into their room, and there was nobody there, and I saw a star bass sitting there, a fretless. And I really hadn't found a fretless that I was happy with. And I sat and played that for about an hour before the doors opened, and thought, this is really cool. I should really look into this. And then spent the rest of the day, wandering around and, hanging out with friends. We went to, I was on the road with Lyle Lovett, and we got to North Carolina, and that's where Steve Bailey lives when he's not at Berkeley. And I invited him to the gig, our show, and he shows up with that fretless bass.
Right.
And he said, Hans Peter, I told Hans that you loved that bass, and he sent it to you.
Right.
So I had never met Hans Peter before. And a couple of months after that was the NAMM show. And so I was there and I met Hans and thanked him so much for this. And we developed a pretty instantaneous relationship. But the thing I did not want to do is I see certain guys in the trade magazines who are out putting their name on everything. And it's like, I know they don't play that instrument. Yeah. Why? Is this to get freebies? And then they're suddenly on eBay and they're selling all this stuff. So I between the Dingwall and the Warwick are profoundly different instruments. I only use the semi-acoustic Warwick and the 5-string, and that's a 4-string only, and then the Dingwall. Just to keep this, where I go. Because I always tell people, I said, like a workman comes to your house, and an electrician or a plumber, and they've got Ryobi and Makita and Milwaukee tools. Everybody, why people have to feel you can only have company. Each one has their own unique qualities, and so I try to just maintain an arsenal of gear that I can draw from, but it's very small. I've gone to sessions where you see the guitar players got like 15 guitars out on stands, and I'm going, we're just doing 2 songs today. Come on, there are too many options here. So.
Yeah. On that Frankenstein bass, you've got 2 split coils on there, the 2 precision pickups, haven't you?
You want me to show you?
Yeah, go on. Yeah,
it's right here.
Whoa! Look at that. That's
so. What this bass is about is I had this neck. I somehow I found a neck. This was a 62 precision neck. But I'm not a P-bass player. I've got one, but I'm not a fan of that profile.
Yeah.
So I took my old 62 jazz bass and went to John Carruthers, who used to be the repairman at Westwood Music here, which was the watering hole in LA for all the players. And we did a profile of my 62 jazz neck and then reshaped this neck into that profile.
Oh. Right.
In the course of doing that, we had to, of course, take the frets out of it. So I was walking around the shop and I saw this coil of fret wire and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "That's Mandolin Frets." And I said, "Let's use that. Let's try that." And he goes, "Man, it'll never work." I said, "Look, the worst that happens is I have to get a refret afterwards. These don't work." This was the best thing I ever did in my life. And I've got every one of my basses, all the signature model basses, all come with Mando frets on them. The feel is so exquisite with them because it's like playing a fretless almost. He said, like, man, they're going to wear out because I play hard and I do a lot of vibrato and stuff. This is we built this bass in 73 and this is the 3rd refret since 1973. And this has been on probably 80% of everything I've ever done. Yeah. So that's the next story. On here, this is the first prototype hip shot detuner.
Yeah.
Dave was a friend, and he said, "I got this idea," and he built this. And this thing is still working like a bandit after all these years.
Yeah.
The body for this was made by Charvel, which they were doing all kinds of replacement stuff, and their factory wasn't that far from me. And I went there, and they didn't have any jazz bodies at the time. They only had precision bodies that they had done a run of. They were all alder, and so what I did is there's a stack of probably about 12 or 15 bodies, and I picked each one up, hung them from a piece of wire, and just tapped them. And this one hanging from the wire just had a resonance to it, and I said, "I'll take that one." The P pickup would have been underneath this plate.
Yeah.
It was there, but we decided to put these pickups where jazz pickups would have gone. Yeah. But I kept thinking about it going, I still think the original idea of a P pickup was wrong because I really felt that this part of it be under the E and the A string should have been closer to the bridge because of the clarity.
Yeah.
It's more balanced because you're already going to get more clarity out of the G and the D just by the nature of their tonality.
Yeah.
So we flipped the pickups where these would have normally been reversed the other way. These are the first generation. I don't know if you can see it on there where it
Yeah,
says
EMG, yeah.
EMG. Yeah, this was Rob's first generation EMGs. I think he stopped making these because these go through batteries like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
If I'm working in the studio, I'll go through a set of batteries a week.
Wow.
In it. And I can tell a tonal difference when I put a battery in. I keep a voltmeter with me, and I like it at about, when they go in and they're like 9.4 or 9.5. When they're down about 8.6, I can just tell in overtones and stuff that it's a little bit. So underneath this cover is where that pickup would have been. So I've got two 9 volts under there because I didn't want to cut another thing into it. And then it's got a badass bridge on it, the badass. And that's this thing, it's one of those things like when you're doing a kind of an experimental project like this, we could have plugged it in and it could have sucked.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
But the first time we plugged it in, John and I, we looked at each other and went, wow, this is really, it seasoned over the years. At one point I had some problems with the neck on it. And at that time I was getting all my work done at Valley Arts out here. And Mike McGuire, who eventually went to Gibson and ran the custom shop. He was half owner in it, and he did all my repair. He did a cold press on the neck rather than a quick adjustment. They kept the base and did this whole procedure where it really solidified probably the cell structure in the neck. And I've never had a problem since. And I keep a relatively high action on all my basses coming from upright. I've never played guitar, so I don't think that way. Where I did a really funny session many years ago. I always forget his name. He was the singer in the Hollies. But there was a track on there, and they thought it would be fun to have me and Entwistle both play on it. So we get to the studio, and I try John's bass. And he tries mine. Neither of us can play the other's bass. His action was so low because his technique was almost almost like Stu Hams like that too. I mean, it's all tapping and stuff. It's a fabulous. I mean, watching him play to me was just one of the most magical things. The way he danced on a bass. But I'm used to digging in my way, and all I was getting was clicking and noise. Yeah. And after like a couple of notes on my bass, his hands were hurting. He says, "What the heck can you play?" It was just a funny moment of us looking at each other, just laughing at our different setups and what we were used to.
How heavy is it, that Frankenstein bass?
It's no heavier than like a traditional jazz bass. Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, you don't notice it when you're wearing it. I mean, it's not like, a Les Paul bass or something like that. That's like, hanging a dresser around your neck.
Yeah. That the mandolin wire. It's funny you should say that, because I've got an old Ibanez that I had from. Well, it's not that old. It was early 90s that's when I bought it, and over the years from just playing it, I think the frets they've been ground down a little bit, but they're very thin anyway. Very exactly like you were saying about the mandolin frets, just like really thin and hardly rise up at all from the neck.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about it. And then I did a gig where the drummer, he was running the sound from where he was, and he was listening so that he was doing the sound, and he'd got headphones on, and he kept saying to me, "Have you got a fretless there?" And I said, "No." And what had happened is that I was putting a little bit of vibrato on it was like a melodic, some fill, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he thought it was fretless. And I said, "Well, no, I've not, but I've put a bit of vibrato on." And then after that, I started messing around and thinking, do you know what? I think it's these frets. And when you mentioned that it sounded like fretless, that it all starts to make sense now.
Yeah, sometimes like if I'm doing a project, I'll use this, but I'll put like a little, I'll use like a TC Chorus Flanger and just put a little pitch shift on it. And all of a sudden people are going, "Oh, was that fretless on that?" Because it wouldn't sound like fretless if you're sitting there soloed, but within the confines of a track, it can really allude to that. Yet
Yeah.
you still have all the accuracy if suddenly you're being asked to play tenths and different
Yeah.
things, because I mean, I play fretless, but it's not my go-to instrument all the time. So there's times where you might get a part and you're concerned about intonation and, where it's coming at, where somebody like Pino for so many years lived with fretless, even though he plays a lot of fretted at but, so having the Mando frets on it really made a difference, especially over the years as they dress, like you said, as they dress down and they become, even more non-existent.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can just lighten your touch ever so much, and really it creates a very beautiful signature of its own.
Yeah. Is that the one with the producer switch on it that you've got?
No, that's another one. And then my Warwick. I'll show you this. This is
Go on
great.
then. Ah, that's
And
beautiful.
so this is the deluxe. Let me see if I can find the camera. So as it goes around, there's a different light comes
Yeah.
on. They don't like any of these sounds. And all it is LEDs and a battery. Doesn't do
Yeah.
anything. There's nothing hooked to it except that. But this is what we did with this one is this is based on the Warwick Star bass. But when they decided to do they wanted to do a signature model, the thing I wanted to do was change the profile through here. And so when you look at it from the side now,
Yeah.
it's a little more comfortable to play. But in order to do this, it's a chambered body and not a hollow body,
Right.
so that they could have the wood underneath the laminate and shape the body and then just do the laminate over it and then chambered everything out and cut it all out. But this thing is a beautiful sounding
Gorgeous.
instrument. They really make some absolutely gorgeous basses. And so still have the fretless standard star bass and one other, and then we built this one. Marcus Spangler at Warwick designed and built this, and he's an amazing luthier. So
Yeah. Oh, that's gorgeous.
yeah, it's a good piece of hardware. And then it got
that's the Dingwall. Is that a signature one of yours?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this one's, I think it's,
And that's got the hip shot on it as well. Yeah.
yeah, this one's got, and I've got one that actually has two hip shots, that has one on the E and on the B. Now, you don't use those that often, but it's a kind of a cool thing, especially having it on an E string. For the years I worked with James Taylor, it was great because we had a number of songs that were in drop D tuning.
Yeah.
And rather than sitting and tuning the bass, just once you get used to a hip shot and really the proper way to tune those so that it's right both ways. And it took a while to really dial in how best to tune those. It's a lot of snapping of the string because you really need to really get the tension right over the nut. Because once you flip that, if the string doesn't move
Yeah.
quickly, then when you start playing, it's going to be a little out of tune. So when I keep flipping the lever back and forth and snapping the string when I'm tuning, and eventually it so settles in that I can do, a full show and it never goes out of tune.
Do you have it set down to half step down or a whole step?
I have it for a whole step.
Right.
But I mean, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really fun. Like you just get to the end of a song and you got this E ringing out. And sometimes I just lower it, so, just to give it a little bit of a personality on the fade out or something like that.
Yeah, I've got detuners on both my basses, and I love it when if you're in E flat and there's the final note, and I'm using 4-string, and then because sometimes if the last note's an E flat or something like that, and you have to play that high E flat, sometimes it just doesn't work as well. And if you can flick it and then go down for that E flat or a D or whatever,
it's dramatic.
Yeah. Rather than having a 5-string just for that, it's
I mean that is the hard part of making those decisions about what to take out with you and what to use. But I think it's a wonderful piece of hardware that doesn't cost much money compared to everything else that you're having to do.
Yeah.
And even if you only use it a couple of times in something, it really it's a lot of fun to have it.
Yeah, I keep saying to people that Hipshot are fantastic in terms of customer service as well. When I've had to have things sent out, even if it's just with a few days' notice and stuff, they're like so good customer service. I can't speak
They're
highly
great.
enough of them.
They're a wonderful company. I've known them since they began the company, and Dave is a remarkable designer, and he gets it. He really understands that your company's only as good as your customers.
Yeah.
And when you treat them well, it's a really great symbiotic relationship that they have. So it's cool. And plus all their tuning machines and stuff. I mean, their whole line of things, bridges, all that stuff is really top quality.
Well, what I'll do is I'll finish up with some questions from the Talkingbass community. So I've got a few of them here. I just asked today. So we've got a few here. So let's have a look. So the first one is from Perry Zimmerman, who asks, thinking back of all the sessions that you've done with well-known artists, what one thing happened that surprised or shocked you the most? If anything.
Well, certain things, have surprised me. When I was in Wolfgang, we were touring gigs we did. Our local management also managed a band called Zephyr, and Tommy Bolin was in Zephyr. And when I flew to New York to do Billy Cobham's Spectrum album, and I walked in the studio, seeing Tommy on the date completely blew my mind because I hadn't seen him like in a couple of years and had no idea he would be in. So that was great. That was a real fun surprise. When I did this band, Barefoot Servants, back in the 90s, which is like still one of the best projects I ever did, going in and the drummer on that was Ray Brinker. And it's one of those things that you walk in a room and you play with somebody, and within 2 bars of playing with this guy, I wanted to play with him for the rest of my life. It's like one of those things. But there's always those things, like I did an album with John Kay, who was the singer in Steppenwolf. And in Steppenwolf, he's always in leathers and it's sunglasses. And you kind of are thinking, well, I hope this guy's not a douchebag, And he was the sweetest guy in the world and one of the nicest artists I've worked with. So, there's nothing really profoundly shocking that's happened, but there's been some real pleasant experiences that I didn't anticipate. And certainly the things that I really enjoy kind of so much is, it's so hard to put into words, but like when you're in the studio working with Joe Cocker or Willie Nelson or Barbra Streisand, just putting your headphones on, and as soon as you hear that voice, you just go, wow.
Yeah.
Because I'm, in my heart of hearts, I'm still fanboy. I still dig all these people. And when you're actually part of the project with them, you still pinch yourself.
Another question then, what we got here, Marcus Drace, he asks, do you have any advice for people learning bass on how to get a good ear for developing a bass line?
I think the only thing I could suggest is listen to a lot of music and listen to stuff that has lines that you find really interesting, that catch your ear, and play along with them. Learn those things. Because I used to play along to records all the time, and kind of get these in the back of your head so that when you're in a situation, that same line may not come up, but the process of that line may be seated in your subconscious, so you do it. But I would say, because it really is such a spontaneous moment when these, for me at least, when these things happen, I'm usually like, my first and second take are really generally the ones for those parts. And so I would say listen to as much stuff as you can. And it's not all shred and all that stuff. Listen to stuff that really defines bass.
Yeah.
When it gets a little disappointing at times when I look on YouTube and all this, and I see so many bass players, it's just all about tapping and slapping. And I'm totally in awe of their facility and what they're capable of doing. But do they hope to work ever? It may be good to have a bit of that in your arsenal of things that may be asked of you, But for the most part, really listen to songs and think about what the song wants. So many of those guys that are posting things aren't playing changes.
Yeah.
It's most of it sitting on an E, and they're just doing all this stuff on it. But really think about how you move through a song and create tension, and how you make the first chorus one thing, but the second chorus isn't cut and paste. You need to evolve a little bit more, and maybe find that moment in there where you can put a signature lick in, where people go, I knew that was you. I knew that was, like Pino would be like that with some of his intervals that he would play, and the little bit of a vibrato he would put. You'd just go, oh, that's Pino. It's got to be Pino.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Yeah.
On that subject, actually,
Yeah.
when you went on to double bass, did you do more jazz or classical?
It was all classical and jazz. I never really played pop on. And my real problem was, this is maybe one of my few regrets, is when I actually started working and really started getting gigs as a studio and touring bass player, there was no demand for upright. It was all electric. And during the course of time, your chops just go down on it. I can sit home and play, and I have fun. But when you're in a town where you had people like Chuck DeMonico and John Patitucci and all these guys that were here, when people would call me for things, I would say, just call them. It's going to be so much better. I could fake it. They don't fake it. They're the real deal. So there's a part of me that wished I would have stayed with upright, kept my lessons going, kept my chops up on it, so that I would be a really proficient doubler. But I'm just, at this point, it's not in the cards, so I just do things like that for my own amusement.
Yeah. And one last one, we've got Mike Strong. What is your process for working with singer-songwriters like Jackson Browne? If they don't have a bass line written for you, do you chart it out first, or do you improvise along with the chord progression until you hit on something that you and the songwriter like?
A little of both.
Mm-hmm.
If I put together any kind of a chart, the chart would really be basically kind of root note chord chart. Just so that I kind of see the direction of the song, but I would not be notating licks or patterns on it. It's really to have that there as a guide to know where I'm going within the song, and then it's really, we would just work on things and find parts. I mean, when I think back to something like Doctor My Eyes, it's really hard to know where that came from. But when we cut the original track, Russ Kunkel played congas on the original track and overdubbed the drums afterwards, which is the exact opposite of most things. So it's hard to remember what we were feeling when he had that going. And I think my bass part on that really is almost like the conga part as compared to a drum part.
Yeah.
But in most situations where the artist comes in, they've like a Clint Black or Vince Gill, somebody like that, when I'm working in country, they'll just sit and play a song for me on guitar, and I might just quickly sketch out just a little roadmap as to where things are going. And then at that point, and if they have any suggestions, I am completely open to suggestions. I want, at the end of the day, you want them to be happy. I mean, this is their project. And especially if you're working on a project with like a new artist, and this may be the only shot they ever get to be in the studio, you want to make it, I want to look at them as important to me as Phil Collins would be musically. You want them to have just, the perfect experience with this. So but it's everything. It's like every day is a different experience. So, there's no set rules. It's whatever you walk into is what you do.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. It's been an honor to speak to you, Lee. And what's your, just for people, your YouTube channel? It's got is it Leland's Beard or something like that?
Oh, no. My YouTube channel, all they have to do is go to Leland Sklar channel on it. My book is lelandsklar'sbeard.com for my giant coffee table book. And then I've got, that's a whole other thing. I've got t-shirts on there with my beard on the front of them and all this stuff. That's been a whole fun adventure doing this book during the pandemic too.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a time of profound human tragedy, and I feel almost embarrassed that I've managed to do some really positive things for myself during it, because so many people are suffering. So, but like, like all the other players, I'm just frustrated as hell that, there's no live work and we're not playing and stuff. So I'm anxious for the time when our band has so much going on right now, and we can hit the road again and finish our documentary film that Denny Tedesco's doing about us, who did the Wrecking Crew movie. And there's a lot going on, but it ground to a slow crawl at this point for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right then, Lee, that's absolutely fantastic. And thanks very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. Anytime you want to yak, just give a shout.